Hi everyone, Ashley here. So today I'm going to walk you through a very special build that I did over in Oasis Springs. And today I am doing a build of a historic house. And this house was recreating the home of Daisy Gatson Bates. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about who she was and what she did, and a little bit of the history behind this house, and then, of course, tell you a little bit about some of the fun stuff I did with this house. So, Daisy Gatson Bates was an American civil rights activist who worked to help end school segregation in the United States. So, Daisy Bates was born Daisy Gatson in Arkansas in 1914. From a young age, violent racism affected Daisy's life. At age 3, her mother was assaulted and murdered by 3 white men, and her father abandoned Daisy, so she was raised by other family members. When she was a teenager, she met Lucius Christopher Bates, or L.C. Bates, who was a journalist, and the two later married. So Daisy Bates and her husband settled in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they operated an African American newspaper called the Arkansas State Press, which supported civil rights causes. So the couple was really active in the civil rights movement for a long time. In their newspaper, they wrote a lot about different civil rights issues that were happening in the U.S. at the time, and promoted those issues in their newspaper. The couple also joined the NAACP, and I'll link some information about the NAACP in the description for the video so you can take a look at that. So the couple joined the NAACP, and Daisy Bates became the president of the Arkansas chapter in 1952. So in 1954, the United States Supreme Court declared that school segregation was unconstitutional in the landmark Supreme Court case Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. So, if you're not already aware of what that court case did, basically what that court case said was that it's unconstitutional to segregate children in schools. So this now made it school segregation, where black students and white students would be forced to attend separate schools, and made that essentially illegal in the U.S. Unfortunately, even though the Supreme Court said this, many school boards across the southern United States refused to allow integration and did not allow black students to attend school with the white students. Some school districts across the South even closed schools rather than allow integration to happen. So the Bates, both Daisy and her husband L.C. Bates, were chronicling this fight for school integration in their newspaper, as well as working in their roles in the NAACP to help school integration happen. So in Arkansas, the NAACP had Daisy Bates strategize the fight for school integration in the state. She played a really important role in the battle in her as president of the Arkansas chapter. And what she did, she helped select several black students to integrate Central Rock High School in Arkansas in 1957. So basically, what the NAACP was trying to do was to, advance school integration and and push to allow black students to attend white schools. And because there was so much pushback across the South, very violent pushback against allowing black students to attend schools, the NAACP was really working very hard to basically, have integration happen at all. So Bates helped select several students who would be attending this high school in Arkansas, and these students eventually became known as the Little Rock Nine. So on the first day of school in September 1957, the students were met with a very hostile white mob when they tried to enter the school, so they were not even permitted to get into the school. The Arkansas State Guard was even called out to block the kids from going into the school. And the Arkansas governor at the time, Orville Phobos, Fabus. I'm mispronouncing his name. Apologies for that, but he was a very bad person, so maybe I shouldn't apologize. Anyways, he had called out the state guard, saying that they were needed to keep peace and order, and that preventing the students from going into the school wasn't violating the Supreme Court's orders to integrate schools. So those 9 black students that had tried to get into the school, they couldn't even get in. So for several weeks, the students were trying to get into the school and kept getting, um, violently pushed back by a very hostile white mob that was preventing them from going into the school. Eventually, President Eisenhower had to step in and actually get the National Guard soldiers to be at the school, U.S. Army troops, and even the Army's 101st Airborne to protect the students and allow them to get into the school. So it was a really big, big to do to have this happen. So finally, late in September, the students were finally able to get into the school to start attending classes. But though they were able to get into the school, they were continuously subjected to verbal and physical violence from other students at the school. And while they were there, although initially there were National Guard soldiers who were helping protect the students and allowing them to and helping them get into the school without being attacked by a mob, it was the number of soldiers that were at the school were gradually kind of taken off from that duty. So the students and the NAACP were not happy about that because it left the students vulnerable, and they felt pretty much abandoned by the federal government in this fight for school integration. So throughout the whole school year, those 9 black students were there attending school. But at the beginning of the next school year in 1958, the governor of Arkansas just completely shut down Little Rock high schools altogether to stop integration from even happening. So eventually, a federal court struck down the governor's law that had forced the school closures, and the Little Rock schools were able to reopen again in 1959. But it just shows the extent of how dramatic this fight for school integration was. And I don't think a lot of people know how extremely difficult and violent it was to for students to be able to go to school together equally. So getting back to Daisy Bates, throughout this entire saga where the Little Rock 9 students were trying to get into the school, and once they were at the school facing a really hostile environment, Daisy Bates was really behind the scenes organizing this whole fight, this in school integration fight. She helped organize protection for the students from the violent crowd. She worked really hard to advise the students and talk to their parents and advocate for the students in the school. She even eventually joined the school parent association, basically, to help advocate for the Little Rock 9 students at the school. Her home became a big, important meeting spot for the students before they went to school every day and after they went to school. And it was a gathering place for the kids, their families, and even the press who were reporting on desegregation. And so that her home was a really important meeting spot. So unfortunately, that role that she was playing made her a target for violence from those who were opposing the school integration. Many times her home was attacked. There were rocks thrown through her window. Her home was shot at several times. Crosses were burned on her lawn twice. And she received violent threats in the mail frequently. And throughout the whole time of 1957 through 58, when all this was going on, the Bates house essentially became a fortress, with floodlights and having even volunteers guarding the home to protect the Bates family. But throughout this whole time, Bates was relentless about continuing to advocate for the students and working to protect them from the violence and harassment they were facing inside and outside the school. Later on, Daisy Bates published her account of the school integration battle in her 1960 book, The Long Shadow of Little Rock, which later won the American Book Award. In the 1960s, she moved to Washington, D.C., where she worked for the Democratic National Committee and worked on many anti-poverty projects for then-President Lyndon B. Johnson. She even spoke in 1963 at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom um, and spoke at that march. This is the same march where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. So I'm sure many people are familiar with Dr. King's speech at that march. Daisy Bates was also there and spoke at the march as well. Bates and her husband later moved to Arkansas in 1968, where they continued their civil rights work and anti-poverty work. So she had a very um, long time span where she was working and very involved with civil rights work throughout the U.S. She died in 1999, and she received many awards for her civil rights work, and in Arkansas she's honored every year with a state holiday. And this is Daisy Gatson Bates Day, which is celebrated on the third Monday in every February, and it's the same day as President's Day. So I left links in the video description for you to learn more about Daisy Bates and the Little Rock Nine. So that was sort of an overview of her life, some of the big things that she had done in her life, and in particular her role in the entire saga with the Little Rock Nine and the battle for school integration in Arkansas. So of course this is the Little Rock Nine was only one incident in the bigger fight for school integration. So I'll definitely leave those links in the description if you want to learn more about what was going on in the rest of the country during this time, because that was only one, a very major incident in the fight for school integration, but there was a lot more going on. So moving to talk a little bit about this house. So as I kind of showed at the beginning of the video, this home was where Daisy Bates and her husband lived during the late 1950s while they were working with the Little Rock students. So this was the home where the kids would meet before school, meet after school to kind of coordinate how they were going to get to school safely, basically. And, this became like a big gathering place for those who were working on the school integration fight. So in regards to this house, I showed a couple of pictures of it at the beginning there. It was a pretty simple house, not too fancy, pretty much just like a block. The house right now, as of today, is a designated historic landmark. It's a private home, so you can't actually see inside the house. So I had to go off of photos that I saw just from the exterior home. And I'm sure what the house looked like in 1957 and 1958 was probably slightly different than what it looks like today. But anyways, so I couldn't really see inside the house to actually, recreate the layout of the interior. So I really just went off the exterior. And what I did is I tried to really stick with the late 1950s decor theme in the home to stay true to the time period. I'm sure plenty of the things that I put in this house is not exactly what Daisy Bates had in her home in 1957. But what I found interesting with doing some research with the decor and the styles of furniture and the colors for the late 50s, there's kind of this, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with sort of this mid-century modern look that you see that's pretty popular now today, that's harkening back to 1960s, even early 70s styles of furniture. What I was noticing with the late 50s kind of decor was this kind of mix of traditional looks with a lot of this, with some of this mid-century modern style coming in. So it was kind of like the late 50s sort of straddling that line there where we're still kind of having a more traditional style that you would see, in a Sims house, and then bringing in this mid-century modern. So there was a lot of powder pink and mint green in houses. I saw that quite a lot. It's kind of like a horrifying color combination, to be honest, to have both of those colors in the same room, but I did see that a lot when I was looking at reference pictures. There's a lot of bright, really kind of ugly carpet styles too. So I try to throw that into the house as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I finally get to the room. Right now in the video, I'm just doing the kitchen, which was for me probably the most fun part. I'm going back to the living room a little bit. The living room was tough just because it was a tiny spot and it was hard to kind of get what I wanted in there. So, like, you see me trying out the bookcase, moving that to the kitchen, trying to see how that works. But here in the kitchen, I went with sort of the black and white pattern floor that you might see in a lot of homes, even in the 1940s and into the 50s. And then I went with these mint green counters from Dream Home Decorator, which was that mint green was something I saw quite a lot in the houses for, or the decor in the 50s and then late 50s. The pictures here, I was trying to kind of give a little bit of a, I switched it out eventually and moved those pictures to somewhere else, but I was trying to give a little bit of nod to sort of Daisy Gatson Bates with the pictures there. But I just went with this Strangerville picture, which I loved using this picture a lot. Anyways, other things about the house and just sort of some things about the style with 1950s. There's quite a lot of very interesting color combos that don't seem to sort of work together, or we would never think to use that today. So I went with, like, for example, these red chairs combined with this mint green. Here I'm just kind of going outside a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about the exterior. So in the reference photos I had for the Daisy Bates home, the landscape was really minimal. There wasn't too much, so I kept it pretty simple on the landscape out here. I did finally add a car and try to add sort of a driveway here. I'm trying out a couple of different cars, trying to figure out what would be the most 50s looking car I could put in here. But the landscape was pretty simple. I just went with some bushes, like how you'll see in the reference picture for this. Excuse me, for this home. And now I'm going back inside to finish up the kitchen. Here I put a little magazine there on the kitchen table with a coffee cup, sort of another nod to Daisy Bates and her husband's newspaper that they ran, the Arkansas newspaper they had that they operated for quite a long time. Eventually, they had to close down their newspaper in about 1959, unfortunately, because they ran out of support and they relied on a lot of advertisements to run their newspaper, and eventually they lost some of that support, especially from different white business owners who hadn't supported their magazine during the Little Rock situation that was happening. Her newspaper with her husband was suffering from lack of funding, because some white businesses were definitely not supportive of school integration, so they stopped putting ads in the Bateses newspaper that they ran. So eventually that newspaper went out of business, but I did definitely keep having a newspaper references throughout the house, and also when I went back to showing the office and fixing up the office space. So here again, I'm just playing around with another car, so this kind of goes on for a while. But then I go back to the house. Again, I'm just playing around with some of the colors, and finally I get to this little office space that I made back behind the kitchen. Since the Bates were journalists and ran their own newspaper, I definitely wanted to have an office space, because I'm sure the Bates in real life had some sort of office in their home. So I try to go with this like traditional looking desk, and then a typewriter, of course, because they were not operating off their Mac computer. So here I'm just kind of playing around, getting some magazine there again to try to reference the newspaper that Daisy Bates and her husband ran. So just playing around here in this area, and honestly, it was very tough to kind of pull off sort of a 50s vibe to this house because I didn't want to go full on mid-century modern style, because I noticed in a lot of the design style for that time period, it wasn't just full on mid-century modern. There was quite a lot of traditional types of styles that you might associate with an earlier time period. But here at the office, the reference pictures I went off of were pictures of like corporate offices, because there wasn't a lot of reference photos I found for home offices for this. Here I'm just putting a little boxes where I'm sure maybe their house had something like that at the time, where you put your files and all your paperwork and stuff. And then here just adding in a little clock and a couple little pictures here. Yeah, I did have fun doing the kitchen, especially. That was probably my favorite room to do, just with the colors and everything, and just so many little cutesy things I could add in there. The office was tougher because I was trying to create something that seemed realistic to the time period, but of course we're in The Sims, so we're limited to what objects we could actually pick from. So trying to create this house with just what we had in available in the Sims catalog is kind of tough here. So I went with this red chair to kind of bring in that uh, red theme that I used in the kitchen a little bit with those red chairs. And here I'm picking the hideous carpet. So I definitely decided I needed to go with some kind of horrifying looking carpet, because that was something I saw in a lot of homes for the 50s, was really vibrant color and very patterned looking carpet. Um, Bathroom was pretty easy. I went with mint green and this powder pink color for the bathroom, which you'll see me kind of do in a second after I'm trying to rearrange it and make the bathroom a little bit bigger. I was initially trying to do this like spa corner tub thing for a while because I did see that in some of the reference pictures, but then I just went back and kept the bathroom easier with this mint green and then the pink wall. I think I did pink walls for this one. Yeah, and then I did that pink pattern floor and the pink walls, and it's it's a choice to have this like mint green and then the pink, because I do like to have rooms that have matching colors. So it was tough for me to do this, but fortunately the colors for the the appliances and the Sims, kind of the colors worked pretty perfectly to have this sort of bathroom. And I think it was pretty accurate to what I was finding with some of the reference pictures. So let me go back a little bit to Daisy Bates and maybe give a little bit more about her. Um, there, at least from the information I found, there wasn't a huge amount of information about, what her school was like when she was, growing up, or, what college she attended. Um, all the information I found didn't really mention anything about when she went to college, so I don't know, you know, maybe someone can do that research and find out. I haven't read her. Now that I know about her book that she published in 1960, the book The Long Shadow of Little Rock. It does make me curious to read her book, and I'm sure maybe she talks a little bit about her life growing up, perhaps, and maybe where she went to school and stuff. But she definitely was educated. Definitely educated enough to be running a newspaper, and being the president of the Arkansas chapter of Little Rock was a pretty big deal, especially at that time where the NAACP was extremely active in across the whole United States, trying to advance civil rights. And this fight for school integration was really important, especially now that in 1954 the Supreme Court made that landmark ruling about saying that school segregation is unconstitutional. So the fact that she was president of the chapter, I think is, you know, a really big deal. And her husband was actually the secretary for the Arkansas chapter at the same time. So you could really see how both her and her husband were sort of working together on the civil rights cause in their state. And I personally never heard of Daisy Gatson Bates until I was trying to do some research and, finding out that President's Day is actually the same day as Daisy Gatson Bates Day was very interesting. And I had wanted to put this video out the same day as Daisy Gatson Bates Day, but I was kind of struggling to get through the video and write up all the research to do this, because it was a lot to do the research, and it was really interesting, and I got really into trying to learn more about her, but especially learn more about the Little Rock Nine. And I actually learned initially about the Little Rock Nine when I was a kid from this magazine that published. I don't even remember the name of this magazine, but it was like there was some like leftover magazines that I think like my mom had her from her job or something. She's a teacher, so I think it was like some leftover magazines from like her school library, and I that's where I read the story of the Little Rock Nine, and I think it was like in some sort of like play form. It wasn't like a play, but it was something like a script, I think, and it was published across several in these magazines that um, I had. And in the magazine, they talked about the Little Rock Nine and just detailed the whole saga, essentially from the student's perspective. And I think it was sort of in a script form, and it was about some of the students and what they experienced while they were there in Little Rock, attending the high school. And it was quite a harrowing story, honestly, to read, and especially as a kid, because I read that when I was a kid. And to me, I found it very fascinating because, I mean, I've always loved history. I got 2 degrees in history, so, obviously I care about it. Uh, but as a kid, it was really fascinating to read a story where it was other kids who were affecting the course of history. And that was something I found really cool. But that story with the Little Rock Nine was telling about their perspective of what was going on, and some of the abuse and harassment they were facing when they were inside the school, not just from the mob that was there pretty much every single day when the students came into school, where they were having to be escorted around school every day by soldiers and having to do school in that type of environment. And of course, the other students and the teachers who were there did not want the students there. So having to be in that kind of environment where everyone doesn't want you there and has very, you know, hostile intentions towards you is pretty scary, I would imagine. And, one of the things that happened in that story when one of the students, and this is all true information, I have to try and look up where that story came from, but I'm sure there's a couple of books on Little Rock Nine and their personal accounts of what happened at the school. But one of the students, she was like in a chemistry class, and another student threw acid in her eyes, and fortunately, she was able to, I think it was the soldier who was with her helped her, to clear the acid from her eyes and helped her. But situations like that kind of showed how dangerous it was physically for those students to be in that school. And, I'm sure those students, understood the gravity of what they were doing. And seeing that, I thought that was always really fascinating for me. And, so I definitely encourage you, go look up the story of the Little Rock Nine, learn about what happened to them, their own experiences there, because that was, a really important piece of history. And unfortunately, in history class, because I know a lot of people say, well, why didn't I learn this in school? They should teach all of this in school. Unfortunately, just, me myself teaching history in school, there's so much history to get through. It's pretty much impossible to get into the nitty gritty of all these really fascinating and important stories, because so many times you have to focus on like sort of give a very kind of surface level view of big historical events because there's just so much to get through. It's like, trying to do an entire exploration of the ocean in depth. It's just not going to be possible. So you can either get really specific and in depth and do a lot of good deep studying on, a few different subjects and get a really comprehensive view of that one piece of history, or you a lot of times what happens in history classes, you end up having to do a very more surface level exploration of a certain subject because there's just not enough time and there's too much material to get through. So that's why I think it is important for people, once you learn a little bit about something, go and do your own research, go do your own reading to learn more about the details and the nuances and the full story about what happened, because there's just so much history out there and just you can't cover all of it in a class. It's just not possible. So, that's why it's fun to be able to take, some a history class that's more on a focused subject, because then you can get into those fun, well, maybe not. I guess I consider history fun. I know a lot of people don't find it fun, but in an in-depth class, maybe like an African American Studies class, you can get into a lot more detail on certain time period and certain events because it's a class that's going to be focused on a specific subject area of history. So I definitely recommend people go and do their own research and learn more about something because it is a lot of fun and it does make history a lot more interesting, come alive, because history it's a story. And as as boring as sometimes reading a textbook can be, because to be honest, a textbook is not going to be super fun, but it's kind of giving you a sort of the essential framework, if you think about it, for you to understand some of those interesting, in-depth details of history. So, if you are taking a history class, try to think about that textbook as just here's the framework, here's the foundation, get through the boring stuff, but that gives you so much information, help you understand sort of the full story when you do learn more about some of these more detailed pieces of history. So, yeah, so just thinking about that, that's just my, you know, 2 cents on trying to appreciate history. Um, yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this, quick video on Daisy Gatson Bates and learning a little about history about her and sort of the background. And I hope you enjoy it, and I'll leave links in this video description so that you can go and learn some more information about all of this. And thank you for watching. Just remember to like and subscribe. Bye!